In today's episode, we'll discuss a very important topic: sexuality within marriage, in a clear and open manner. By watching until the end, many of your questions will be answered. Our goal is to simplify this topic to make it understandable for everyone. Unfortunately, many couples face barriers in this area, which ultimately harms their relationship. A pastor once told me about a case where a man sought help, believing his wife was possessed just because she dressed sensually. This situation shows how religious beliefs can sometimes interfere with a healthy sexual life between spouses. Interestingly, while many couples struggle to discuss sex in marriage, others grapple with issues like pornography addiction or even infidelity. This leads us to reflect. Sex is everywhere. In movies, TV shows, on the internet, and even in casual conversations. However, within a Christian context, we're called to follow a different path, one aligned with God's teachings. Many assume that, after marriage, anything goes sexually. But the Bible teaches that there are practices that displease God. We'll delve deeper into this, but first, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive notifications about future videos. One essential point to clarify: experiencing pleasure with your spouse is not sinful. Unfortunately, many churches treat this topic as taboo, causing couples to feel guilty about something that is actually a blessing from God. People often ask, "What would Jesus do?" And since Jesus never married, some believe that sex is impure or solely carnal. However, Jesus did not avoid sex because it was sinful, but because his mission was unique: to die on the cross for our sins. He left us valuable teachings, which should be the foundation of our lives, including our views on sexuality. In the book of Genesis, we see that God created man and woman as sexual beings, and this is part of his perfect creation. Sexual relations are the union of two people becoming one flesh. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 also speaks of the importance of sex in marriage, advising couples not to abstain for prolonged periods to avoid giving space to temptation. Thus, we must understand that the lack of sex in marriage can create vulnerabilities, leading to temptations. Mutual satisfaction strengthens the relationship and maintains marital unity. Regardless, ethics should prevail, and these vulnerabilities should not be seen as excuses to sin. We are all human beings with natural instincts and desires. Although this does not justify acting on them recklessly, it's a reality that can lead to actions we later regret. Before discussing the 4 types of sexual relationships forbidden in marriage, let's reflect on adultery. We've all heard the phrase, "If you love, you don't cheat." This sounds romantic, but reality can be quite different when facing the challenges and routine of marriage. Sadly, cases of adultery are rising, even within churches, causing great pain and destruction in families. We need to understand that no matter how well-intentioned we are flawed. Jesus warns us of this in Matthew 26. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." The truth is that we're all tempted by the seductive offers of this world. Not even love between a couple guarantees protection against betrayal. There's an illusion that true love would never allow one to feel attracted to someone else. But the reality is that our flesh is weak, and if we don't cut off certain thoughts, we may end up succumbing to temptation. James 24:1 explains that each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full-grown, gives birth to death. This shows that as long as we're in our human bodies, we might feel attraction for others, which doesn't mean we've sinned, only that we are human and imperfect. In addition to our fragility, we are surrounded by a culture that promotes infidelity, pornography, and objectification of the body. All these pressures, coupled with marital difficulties, explain why so many end up cheating, even if they love their spouse. 1 Peter 5 warns us to be vigilant, because the enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Satan is always on the lookout, ready to bring down those who do not stay firm in seeking God and end up surrendering to worldly pleasures. Therefore, husbands and wives, remember that we are flawed human beings, so we must always watch and pray, acknowledging our weaknesses to avoid falling into the surrounding traps. Only by confronting the truth can we resist temptation and protect our relationships. The desires of the flesh often lead us to want what is forbidden, and if we don't close the doors to sin, we may fall into temptation and end up betraying our spouse. Does this mean that everyone is destined to fail? Absolutely not. The lesson here is that anyone who loves God and their partner should avoid even the appearance of evil and not trust in their own strength. If you're being tempted, be cautious. Don't assume you're strong enough to resist alone. The Bible warns us, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. My best advice is not to face temptation head-on, but to flee from it. Additionally, talk to your spouse and work together to resolve issues rather than avoiding them. The fear of God is essential. Many confuse fearing God with being afraid, but it truly means respecting and revering the Lord, recognizing that He does not approve of sin and disciplines those who disobey. By following these guidelines, betrayal will never be a part of your life. There's a verse in Proverbs 28 that says, "Blessed is the one who fears the Lord always, but whoever hardens their heart falls into calamity." If we want a blessed life with peace and protection, we simply need to fear God and obey His word. Now, let's discuss 6 types of sexual practices prohibited by the Bible. Spouse swapping. This practice is clearly condemned by verses addressing adultery. Leviticus 18:20, as mentioned, forbids a man from lying with his neighbor's wife. This clear stance highlights adultery as a serious sin due to the betrayal of relational trust. Threesomes. Jacob's example with his wives can be interpreted variously. Although polygamy appears in the Bible, many theologians argue this was not God's intention for marriage. Matthew 19, where Jesus reaffirms the ideal of one man and one woman in marriage, often supports a monogamous ideal. Abuse. Many grow up thinking abuse only involves physical force, but this isn't entirely true. Abuse within marriage can occur if one spouse forces the other into sexual relations without mutual agreement. Some justify this through a misinterpretation of 1 Corinthians 7. But the real message is about mutual satisfaction and not forcing anything against the other's will. Pornography. Though not a sexual act per se, pornography often leads to harmful sexual behaviors and can destroy marital purity. Even if both spouses agree to watch pornographic content, this may open doors for weakening the relationship. The Bible calls us to maintain purity within marriage. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. Complicity in forbidden sexual practices. In 1 Corinthians 5, Paul addresses sexual immorality in the Corinthian church, warning believers to avoid association with those who live in unrepentant sin. Close ties with people persisting in sin can lead to a moral and spiritual decline, undermining integrity. Sexual addictions and compulsions. In Galatians 5, Paul describes works of the flesh, including sexual immorality and impurity, stating that those who engage in such acts will not inherit God's kingdom. Persistent immoral behavior harms spiritual life and creates a cycle of shame and dependency, leading to guilt and isolation. Regarding practices like oral sex and sex toys, the Bible does not provide direct guidance. The key is mutual agreement and comfort between spouses. If something causes discomfort or conflict, it's best to avoid it. The principle is to honor both God and your spouse, strengthening the relationship. When the Bible does not explicitly address a matter, we can use discernment based on biblical principles. Our actions should not condemn us, as stated in 1 John 3. If our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God. This is especially true in areas where no explicit prohibition exists. I'm glad you made it to the end of this chapter. Now is the time to reflect on everything we discussed. How do you view these sexual behaviors in light of biblical teachings? Did this content challenge you to reconsider your practices and beliefs? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and exchanging ideas can enrich our spiritual journey. Together, we can seek a life more aligned with God's principles, promoting an atmosphere of support and understanding.